Heading into September 9th, Steve Sarkisian faced a daunting task. His next game was against former boss Nick Saban, an elite defensive coach who has a habit of crushing the dreams of his old employees. In fact, heading into this year's Texas-Alabama game, Saban held a 28-2 record against head coaches who'd worked for him at some point in the past. Of course, Saban hardly ever loses to anybody, so that stat probably doesn't show what it seems to, but it is possible to make a more nuanced point. At Alabama, Saban's built one of the great dynasties in college football history, and while many programs have tried to replicate it by hiring his former employees, only Kirby Smart seems to have made it to his level. In the face of those odds then, on September 9th, 2023, Sarkisian joined the very short list of Saban assistants who've been able to beat the master. What's more, he did it in persuasive fashion, with the Longhorns holding the lead for more than 47 minutes of total gameplay. While Texas did lead for most of the game, they didn't have an easy time offensively. They mostly struggled to run the ball, and while the passing stats ended up looking good, 131 of their yards and 2 touchdowns came in the fourth quarter, with the rest of the game being a lot more pedestrian. In fact, this game looks a lot different if you stop it after the third quarter, where it was the Crimson Tide who were up by the low-scoring margin of 16-13. Where the Longhorns finally broke through, though, was in the downfield passing game. On drives where they had a passing play of 20 or more yards, they scored 21 points, but in the rest of the game, they scored just 13, so they really needed those chunk plays through the air to come away with this win. As we'll see in this video, though, to get to those chunk plays, Sark had to do something that's not easy. He had to make Saban's defense predictable. That's hard to do because Saban's a scheme maximalist. He's got a ton of calls and checks in the game plan, and at any given time, the look that you'll be facing depends on a mix of your own formation, the play that he thinks you're running out of it, and the game situation. To see how this works, let's check out 3 plays from the second quarter where Texas is using the exact same formation and pre-snap motion while Alabama defends them with 3 different calls. The formation that we're studying here is what I'll call gun far ace. In that label, ace is a 1-back 2x2 formation with a tight end and wide receiver to one side and 2 wide receivers to the other. The gun far part of that then tells us that in the shotgun, the running back will be set away from the side of the tight end. So here are the tight ends to the right side of the formation, and so the running back is offset to the quarterback's left. Once they were in this formation, one of the things that Texas liked to do was to take the wide receiver to the tight end side and to put him in orbit motion, meaning that he's going to work around behind the quarterback pre-snap before releasing out on a swing to the opposite side. Now, like Saban, Sark also has some scheme up his sleeve, and so while the motion and formation are going to be the same on the 3 plays that we're about to see, the actual play calls will vary. On this particular one, it's a counterplay to the left, to the same side as the running back, and to the same direction as that wide receiver motion. And here, we want to focus on 2 things. We want to focus on how Alabama's responding to the motion, and we want to focus on how many defenders they can get to the point of attack against the run, because those are the 2 things that are going to change on each of the plays that we're about to see. On this play, starting with the motion, things are pretty straightforward. As the wide receiver comes across, they're going to roll their safeties toward him, with the safety to the motion side dropping down inside, and the other safety playing a cheat technique back toward the middle of the field. Something worth noticing here is that while Alabama is responding to that wide receiver motion, they aren't matching it very tightly. What I mean here is that when that safety rolls down to the side of the motion, he's not actually running with the wide receiver man-to-man. Instead, he's spinning down toward the box, and from here, he's going to work kind of an inside-outside bracket with Alabama's nickelback. The nickelback's lined up outside of Texas's slot receiver, and so when he sees motion coming toward him, he's going to work to stay outside of his man. That way, if the quarterback were to throw the ball to the guy in motion, that nickelback could be there to set the edge and force it back inside. The safety then would be able to run it down from the inside out. By playing with their nickelback and safety like this, though, the Tide are left with just 6 defenders immediately in the box. They've got a nose tackle lined up over the center, and then a defensive end and linebacker to the tight end side. As I've said, though, Texas is running counter to the left here, to the side of the wide receiver motion and to the side of the running back's alignment. And so to that side, Alabama has a defensive end pinched inside the left tackle, a linebacker walked out in position to take away the edge, and then another linebacker in the box at the second level. When we look at this front structure a little more closely, what we see is that there are only about 4 guys who can easily get to the point of attack here, with those 4 being the nose tackle, the defensive end, and the 2 linebackers. Texas will obviously need 4 blockers to take those guys out, and so to get this, they're going to block back with their left tackle and left guard on the 2 defensive linemen. And then they're pulling the right guard and right tackle across the formation to pick up the two linebackers. In this case, the play's not going to go anywhere. And remember I said that Texas struggled to run the ball in this game, but we can at least see here that from a pure numbers standpoint, the play call gives Texas the blockers that they need to run the ball. Now, as I said, Saban is very detail-oriented when it comes to scheme and any weaknesses that he might have. And so on this play, just 2 plays later, we're going to get a different defensive look against the same offensive formation and motion. So we see Texas in their gun far ace look with a tight end and wide receiver to one side of the field, 2 wide receivers to the other, and the running back set away from the tight end. As we saw in the last play, Texas is then going to take the tight end side wide receiver and put him in orbit motion to the side of the back, where he'll end up running a swing to the wide side of the field. On the last play, we saw that Texas ran their counter play to the same side as this motion, and so here, after just 2 plays, Alabama's adjusted to that threat. Remember that on the last play, their nickelback had been lined up outside of the slot receiver, working that inside-outside bracket with the safety who was rolling down. What they've done this time is they've taken that nickelback and they've walked him down inside, letting him get involved as an extra defender in the run fit. Now that they've done this, if Texas were to run counter to this side, then the Tide would have 5 guys who could get to the point of attack, outnumbering the 4 blockers that Texas can get to this side with their counter run scheme. As for the motion, they're defending that receiver in basically the same way that they were last time. So they're not matching up with him directly, but are instead playing with that inside-outside bracket. It's just that this time they've switched up assignments between the nickelback and the safety. This time the nickelback, who's walked in close to the box, is going to be the one pursuing that motion from the inside out. And then the safety is rolling down outside of the slot receiver to set the edge and force everything back inside. On this play, Texas is throwing to that motion man and trying to set up a wide receiver pass, but when they do this, that safety is able to come downhill on the perimeter to hurry him, potentially contributing to an incompletion. Looking at the scheme on the perimeter of both of these plays, though, there are some potential weaknesses in the pass and screen games. Looking back at the first play, for example, we'll remember that Alabama was taking the safety to the motion side and they were dropping him down toward the box. From there, he wasn't directly matching up with the receiver that was in motion, but was instead participating in that inside-outside bracket with the nickelback. What we see if we pause the play right here, though, is that this assignment doesn't put him in a very good position to defend stuff to the outside, and there are a bunch of ways that Texas could exploit this. One simple option would be to have the outside receiver crack back on the nickel to seal him off inside and prevent him from setting the edge. And then for the slot receiver to wrap up to the cornerback, leaving nobody in position to tackle that motion receiver on something like a simple swing pass. On the next drive then, when Texas comes out with the same formation in motion for a 3rd time, Alabama's going to defend it in an entirely different way. This time, they're going to leave their nickelback over the slot receiver to cover him. And then the safety to this side is going to roll down and match up with that motion man, running with him man-to-man. Of course, by committing both of those defensive backs out wide in coverage like this, neither of them will be able to come down into the box as an extra run defender. Texas is coming back to their counterplay here, and so that means that the big question will be, how is Alabama going to get enough defenders to take away this run play to the right? This time, they're going to do it with line movement. Remember that on counter, Texas is going to take their left tackle and left guard and pull them across the formation, where they'll combine with a right guard and right tackle to give them 4 blockers. To truly shut this down, Alabama's going to want to get 5 defenders to that side, and so those guys will have to be this linebacker up at the top of the screen, and then these 4 defenders playing on the interior. To get all of those guys to the point of attack, the Tide are going to ask their 2 interior linemen to stunt across the formation post-snap, and then they're going to ask these 2 blitzing linebackers to cross the face of anyone who blocks back toward them. In this way, they're able to use this stunt to take away all of the running lanes that counter's trying to exploit, and this forces the running back to bubble out to the sideline where he should have been tackled for a loss. At this point, step into Steve Sarkisian's shoes for a minute and try to imagine calling plays against this defense. You've got this series of plays and counters that you want to build off of this formation in motion, but on one play, Alabama shows you a light box, encouraging you to run. On the next, they walk a defensive back into the box and dare you to throw. And then on the third, they match up with you on the perimeter and stunt right into your run scheme. This introduces a lot of uncertainty into your play calling, and it makes it very hard to get into the right play on any given snap. If you don't want to get caught up in this guessing game, then you have to find some way to make your opponent predictable, and in this game, Sark was able to do that with the use of compressed formations. Let's start by looking at this tight bunch set where Texas is lining up with a 3-man bunch down at the bottom of the screen with all 3 guys lined up in tight to the offensive line. Up at the top of the screen, they then have just a single wide receiver on the opposite side. Whenever you think about any offensive formation and why a team might be running it, you should always start by asking what part of the field that formation gives you access to and where it creates space. So, when Texas brings all of their receivers in tight to the formation like this, one area that it gives them access to is the middle of the field, where all of those guys are in position to run quick crossing routes over the middle. Where it creates space then is to the outside. When the offense brings all 11 guys in tight like this, the defense is going to collapse in to match them. This then creates a wide area out toward the sideline where there are no offensive players and therefore no defenders. If the offense were somehow able to get the ball out into those areas, then it'd have the potential for a big play on the perimeter. Now, Alabama obviously knows this, and so in coverage, when they see a compressed set like this, they're going to make sure that they're setting a hard edge and keeping everything inside. Ultimately, though, this desire to keep things contained is going to make them predictable because it's going to lead them to play a lot of similar coverages. The basic picture is that whenever Texas goes compressed like this, the Tide are going to run a lot of split safety coverages with one safety playing over the top to each side of the field. So what's the benefit of this? Well, if we look at the top of the screen where Texas has just that single receiver, we see that Alabama has that deep safety over him playing inside and over the top. With that defender in that spot, it frees up the cornerback to play outside and underneath. From this position, if that receiver runs anything out toward the sideline, the corner's in good position to cut it off. If, on the other hand, he runs something deep or deep and inside, then the cornerback can squeeze that receiver from the outside in, keeping him from breaking back out toward the sideline and funneling everything inside toward his deep safety help, as we're seeing right here just before they go off screen. This basic structure, then, will let Alabama take away a lot of the things that this compressed formation is threatening. For example, on this play we see another compressed set, so up at the top of the screen we see another one of those squat cornerbacks playing outside and underneath, and then they've got that safety in position to take away anything vertical and to the inside. After the snap, Texas is going to take this running back right here and release him out into the flat. When he does this, that cornerback's just sitting there taking this route away and forcing the quarterback to come back inside on a shallow cross right into the teeth of Bama's coverage in the middle of the field. On this play, Texas is in another tight bunch set with 3 receivers in tight up at the top of the screen. Again, Alabama's got a safety to this side ready to drop out and defend anything vertical, while the cornerback plays low and outside. On this play, the Longhorns are trying to get out to the perimeter with a reverse, so they're going to fake a run play with their offensive line and running back working to the left. And then they're going to bring the single wide receiver from the bottom of the screen on the reverse, where he'll be trying to get outside on the opposite edge. As the play develops, though, we see that cornerback squatting in the flat and setting the edge, not only containing this play and forcing it back inside, but also avoiding his blocker and falling in to make the tackle. Now earlier, we saw that when Texas lined up in that gun far ace formation and ran that same orbit motion, Alabama defended them with 3 different looks. What we've just seen here, though, is that on 3 plays out of compressed formations, Alabama's defense has shown 3 pretty similar looks, with split safeties over the top and hard cornerbacks in the flat. Now remember, Sark's goal in all of this is to make Saban's defense more predictable, because if he knows what's coming, then he can make tailor-made calls to go after that defense, and on this play, we're going to see that start to pay off. Here, Texas is in a 2x2 compressed set, so they have 2 wide receivers lined up tight down at the bottom of the screen, and a tight end and a receiver lined up in close to the top. When we look at the coverage, we see that Alabama's giving us that same kind of look that we've come to expect, so to each side of the field they have a squat cornerback playing outside and underneath in the flat, and then they've got a safety playing inside and over the top. On this play, Sark's going to dial up a concept that exploits this structure and gets his leading receiver, Xavier up here, isolated on a post route against the safety that's lined up over him. What Sark needs to think about then is, okay, if I want to get Worthy one-on-one on that safety, what other defenders might be able to come to his rescue? The quick answer is that in some cases, he could potentially get help from the cornerback on the edge, like if that guy were to drop and squeeze this route from the outside in. If this happened, then the safety could play hard inside to take away the post, and so that'd be one effective way to shut down this kind of route. The other obvious help could come from the backside safety, who could potentially drop deep down the hash to cut off this post from the inside. What Sark needs to do then is control both of those defenders, and he's done this with a creative use both of formation and route combination. So to start, how's he going to get rid of the cornerback at the top of the screen? Well, to do that, he's going to line up with his tight end outside of Worthy, and here he's just going to put that guy on a stupid little route to the flat. At first, this might not look like much, but remember that in these compressed sets, the cornerback outside on the edge is the last line of defense against anything to the outside. And so when the tight end breaks out on this 1-yard flat route, that cornerback has to cover him or risk letting him run free in all that space to the sideline. In this way then, with his formation and route combination, Sark has been able to eliminate one of Alabama's best coverage defenders by forcing him to cover a tight end shallow in the flat. Alright, so that's one help player down, but what about that backside safety? Well, remember that in this structure, the cornerback on this side is playing low and outside, while that safety's playing inside and over the top. To attack this structure, Sark's going to have the inside receiver, number 2, Jonte Cook, run a dig route, pushing vertical to 12 yards and then breaking inside over the middle. As he does this, we see the cornerback playing outside of him as that last line of defense on the edge, preventing him from getting out to the sideline. With that cornerback playing outside, though, it means that the safety has to jump up to defend this inside breaking route over the middle. As we can see here, when he does this, it opens up a ton of space behind him, and so at this point, the Horns have been able to control that safety with this dig route. They've been able to control the opposite cornerback with the tight end in the flat, and all of that serves to isolate Worthy on the safety playing over the top of him with a ton of space toward the middle of the field. Worthy beats his man pretty badly, and Texas picks up their first touchdown of the game. Here, we're going to see another compressed set from a play midway through the third quarter. This is still going to attack Alabama's split safety coverage structure, but this time, to fully understand why the play does so well, we need to add in something about personnel usage by each team, and another way that Sark was able to make Saban's defense predictable. On this play, Texas is in 12 personnel, meaning that they have 1 running back and 2 tight ends on the field. With that personnel grouping, they're lining up in a 2-by-2 set, so they've got a mirrored look to each side with a tight end lined up on each wing, and wide receivers lined up outside of them on the line of scrimmage. The running back then, instead of lining up offset to one side or the other in the shotgun, is lined up in the pistol directly behind the quarterback, and all of this means that strictly from a personnel standpoint, each side of the formation is identical here. So why does this matter? Well, let's take a closer look at that last touchdown that we studied. As we saw there, that play was also run out of a 2-by-2 set, with 2 receiving threats to each side of the field. On that play, though, the 2 sides weren't identical. Texas was in 11 personnel, which meant that they had 1 running back, but just 1 tight end and then 3 wide receivers on the field. When Texas lined up 2-by-2, then, it meant that while one side had a tight end and a wide receiver, the other side had 2 wide receivers. This is important because in Alabama's defense, they typically ask their nickelback to travel to what's called the passing strength of the formation, or the side that represents the biggest threat in the passing game. In this formation, 2 wide receivers are more dangerous than a tight end and a wide receiver, and so here we see that their nickelback, number 13 Malachi Moore, has traveled to the 2 receiver side. Now let's get back to our new play where we've seen that each side of Texas's formation is completely identical. In this case, there's not an obvious passing strength like on the last play, and so when this happens, Alabama's going to designate the wide side of the field as the passing strength. The ball's on the left hash here, and so to the left side, there's just not that much room before you run into the sideline. To the right side, on the other hand, there's a lot more space, and so all else being equal, when the personnel is the same to each side, that wide side of the field will be more dangerous. Because of that, on this play, we see Moore lined up to that wide side of the field. What this means is that although Texas's formation is completely balanced, Alabama's defense is skewed toward the wide side, and we can see that if we just count guys in the back 7. To the wide side, they have a cornerback, a safety, a nickelback, and a linebacker, giving them 4 guys. To the other side, then, they just have a cornerback, a safety, and a linebacker. On this play, Texas's play call is going to attack that imbalance. They're going to do this with something called a weak side flood concept, a play that attacks the defense by putting 3 receivers at 3 different levels, with 1 deep, 1 intermediate, and 1 shallow. The deep guy in this pattern is going to be the outside receiver to this side. He's going to take an inside release, and then he's going to push downfield for as long as we can see him in the shot. Alabama's in a split safety coverage here, so remember that when that guy goes vertical, it's generally going to be up to the cornerback to defend the outside and keep him away from the sideline. As that receiver goes vertical then, the cornerback's going to sink and funnel him inside toward his safety help. Notice though that this gets rid of two tied defenders. Before the snap, they had a cornerback, a safety, and a linebacker to the side, but when that receiver goes vertical, he takes the cornerback and the safety with him, and this means that the linebacker is the last man standing underneath. All that Texas has to do then is beat him, and they're easily going to be able to do this with the other two receivers in that three-man flood. First, the running back in the pistol is going to release out into the flat, and there he's going to become the shallow route in this flood concept. The linebacker knows that his cornerback's sinking to defend the outside receiver here, and so when he sees the running back widening, he's going to widen as well to take that away. What that's going to do, though, is open up that space behind him down the intermediate sideline. To get a receiver into that area, Sark's going to take the tight end from the opposite side of the formation and give him a delayed release off a play action. So, after the snap, the quarterback's going to fake a handoff on an outside zone play to the left. And that tight end's going to stay in for a beat as if he's run blocking. Before long, though, he's going to release on a crossing route, becoming the intermediate man in the flood. As we know, by this point, the vertical routes run off the cornerback and the safety. The shallow route sucked up the linebacker, and so without the nickelback as an extra coverage defender to this side, there's nobody to pick up the tight end on the crossing route, giving Texas a huge gain down the sideline. On still other snaps, Sark had plays in mind to attack to the side of the nickelback, and that brings us to Texas's final touchdown, which put the game away by putting them up 2 scores midway through the fourth. Here, the Horns are in 11 personnel, so again, they have 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 3 wide receivers on the field, but this time they're lining up in a 3-by-1 set, giving Alabama a very clear passing strength to latch on to. 3 receiving threats are obviously more dangerous than 1, and so as we know, Alabama's going to put their nickel back to the 3 receiver side. Again though, the threat isn't just the number of receivers here, it's how tight their split is to each other and to the offensive line. We've already talked about the threat of one of those receivers getting outside on the edge, but another problem is that when multiple receivers line up close to each other like this, there's a huge risk for picks and things like that, because as wide receivers cross each other in all this traffic, there's a high risk that defenders could get picked off and lose their man in coverage. To deal with this, Alabama's going with another split safety zone coverage, so they have 1 safety playing over the top of the single receiver, while the other plays to the trip side. To the trip side, to deal with all the risks that we've been talking about, they're playing a 4-on-3 matchup zone coverage. As a first line of defense on the outside, they're putting their cornerback on the edge as we've seen throughout this video, and he seems to be playing a loose man technique over his receiver. At the very least, he has to defend that guy on anything outside or vertical because there just aren't any other defenders outside of the hash mark here. To the inside, they're then playing with a 3-on-2 triangle structure over the other 2 receivers. In this structure, the nickelback's going to line up outside of the middle or number 2 receiver, and he really has to do that to protect the edge. Remember that the cornerback to this side has to take his man at least on anything vertical or outside, and that means that the cornerback can easily get run off by that guy. There's no guarantee that he'll be there as a help player on the perimeter, and so the nickelback has to play outside of the number 2 receiver, covering him on anything outside or vertical, and squeezing anything else inside to that deep safety over the top. The linebacker then lines up inside, ready to cut off anything breaking back toward the middle of the field, while the safety plays as the 3rd man in the triangle over the top. All else being equal, that 3-on-2 coverage triangle over the inside receivers should be pretty sturdy against the pass, and so on this play, Sark's looking outside where he's trying to set up a post route 1-on-1 between his outside receiver and that cornerback who's covering him in loose man. As we saw in the first touchdown then, the key to designing a good route combination here is all about controlling anybody else who could offer help on that route. If we look at Crimson Tide players who could potentially get involved here, the biggest candidates are the nickelback, who could possibly drop out or play underneath of this route, and of course the safety, who's playing deep and inside in perfect position to take away a post. Although the deep post is the goal here, the route that really makes everything go is coming from the next receiver inside of him, because on this play, that guy's running a dig route over the intermediate middle. The problem here for Alabama is that, remember, their nickelback is lining up with outside leverage against this receiver. The nickelback has no guarantee that the cornerback will be there to help him on the outside, and so he has to take away any routes that could break out to the sideline. What this means, though, is that when that receiver runs something inside, the nickelback's going to be at a big disadvantage. So who can help him on this dig route? Well, he can either get help from the safety, who's lined up inside and over the top, or he can get help from the linebacker, who's playing inside and underneath. As I've said, Sark's goal here is to get the deep shot one-on-one on the outside, and so what he really has to do to set that up is force that deep safety to come up on the dig route, and that brings us to the final route in this concept, which is a speed out by the inside or number 3 receiver. What this route does is it puts a stretch on Alabama's linebacker, who's playing that inside role in the coverage triangle here. If that guy drops to play inside and underneath of the dig, then there won't be anyone left on the outside to defend this out route. As we know, in this compressed set, letting a receiver get free to the sideline like this is almost as bad as a deep completion because there are no defenders out there to contain the ball once it's caught. Because of that threat, in this coverage, the linebacker is going to push out to defend the out route. The nickelback and cornerback are both gone when their guys go vertical, and so that linebacker becomes the last line of defense to prevent this quick out from going for big yardage down the sideline. So what does that mean for our dig route? Well, it means that if the nickelback is going to get any help on the inside, it's going to have to come from that safety playing over the top, and that's exactly what happens here. When he sees the number 2 receiver breaking inside on his dig route, he comes downhill to jump it. And we can see here that if that guy weren't there, then quarterback Quinn Ewers would have an easy completion on the dig route over the middle. Once the safety does jump this route, though, it means that nobody's left to help the cornerback defend the outside receiver on his post route, and at this point, that cornerback's already lost that one-on-one. All that Ewers has to do now is put a lot of air under this ball and let his receiver run under it. The pass is complete, the Longhorns expand their lead to 10, and at this point the game's pretty much out of reach as Steve Sarkisian joins the very short list of Saban assistants who've gone on to defeat the master.